there's a ton of stories of how, like, some people would go to, like, landowners, not
Yep,
landowners,
yeah.
but like
No,
very
no,
poor
yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and be like, hey, we'll give you this piece of land, just jump ship, and you'll be taken care of for the rest of your life. In that point in time, like, I can empathize with the action that that poor family might have taken
Yeah.
ages ago, because for them this was generational wealth that was just being served up to them on a plate. If they chose to believe in a religion that they didn't know about,
Yeah.
which is the unfortunate part, right? Is that, and I mean, I don't know how common this is now in some parts of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Probably not as common as it was before, but like conversions were a thing, right? Where people would go give you something to like jump ship and change religions and all that kind of stuff. Hey Pedro, how's it going?
Doing good. How are you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Before we get started, if you want to let the people know who you are, what you do, any likes and dislikes in everyday life, future aspirations, anything and everything you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Pedro Graeml. I'm originally from Brazil, Curitiba. It's in the very south of Brazil. It's kind of a bigger-ish city, 3 million people. I'm a student here at the University of Central Oklahoma in admin. I'm studying international business, have a minor in leadership. About to graduate in May, which is really exciting.
Nice.
Kind of like coming to the end of the road, so that's fun. I'm about to get married. And so
congratulations.
Getting married in May. Thank you. And so that's also really exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. As far as likes and dislikes, man, really upfront, like I'm a follower of Jesus and I'm a Christian. But I really love studying the Bible, like my free time, like devotion aside, like I love studying the Bible. I love looking into the structure of the books and the collections of the books. I love looking at hyperlinks and like really nerding out, and so like that's how my free time kind of goes.
Gotcha.
And I would do a lot of that, a lot of podcasts and stuff like that. I'm a bass player, so I play quite a bit. And I love art. I love to paint. Love hanging out with people. Love time in like silence and just by myself. So I'm like kind of like introverted at heart, and so I recharge. Introverted in the sense of like recharging. Like I recharge whenever I'm like by myself in the room. But I think that's it. I really love fruits, and so
what kind of fruit?
Man, I think the ones that are like the weirdest for me, like the ones that I haven't tried, those are the ones that I'm gonna be like, yes, I love this. It's just so exciting. Like whenever I first came to America, berries and all those things, that was kind of like very different from Brazil.
Sure.
We know about them,
right?
Like strawberries, but like blueberries, raspberries, blackberries,
right?
And so I loved it. And so things like that, I just love trying new fruits. I think it's fascinating.
Sure.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How long has it been since you've been here?
So the way my story goes is kind of like weird because I came here originally after my senior year in Brazil. Essentially, how it happened was I was a senior in Brazil and I had no idea what I was going to study after college.
Gotcha.
And I don't know how it is back in your country, but in Brazil, like the college process to go in is just very demanding, very rigorous, very stressful. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so kind of in that time, my mom suggested, hey Pedro, like why don't you like do an exchange program? Go like you've been learning English since you were like 4th grade, and why don't you go practice? Why don't you go? Oh, is that something that you like? And I was like, I think part of me was like, yes. And then the other part of me was like, I'm so scared of like choosing the wrong thing for college here in Brazil and getting it wrong and going through all this really extensive process. And so I was like, yeah, let's try it. And then I applied. It was through like an agency and I ended up in Piedmont, Oklahoma. And so that was in 2018. And so I did a year here in high school.
I see. Okay.
So like 2018-19. And then that year ended. I went back to Brazil for a semester. So like August through December of 2019, and then in between, I was applying for colleges and doing all that in Brazil.
Sure.
And I was like, well, I need to apply for ESO and see what happens. And so got accepted, got in, and then in 2020 I came back, and so been at UCO since 2020, and then in Oklahoma 2020. So 4 years now, plus my year in high school, so 5 years almost.
5 years. Right.
It's just kind of mind-boggling. Like,
yeah,
it's been like a fourth of my life already. Like,
right.
what, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, 5 years in Oklahoma.
That's wild. What was it like moving here as a high school student?
It was interesting. Like, you know, my family growing up, and like even like my mom, my grandma, they all cultivated like a love for cultures, and they saw like it is important for us to have like, you know, open minds to different cultures, and there's a lot to learn with different cultures. And so like my mom and uncles and aunt, they all did like somewhat a form of exchange program, either to Australia or the United States, and then cousins did it. And so for me growing up, it was like, man, it would be really cool to do an exchange program to like London. I just loved like British culture. I thought it was so cool. And then towards the tail end of like my high school years, I was like really into football. And I mean like American football.
Gotcha.
And so I was really excited to come to America because of football. And so whenever I got placed in Oklahoma, I knew like, oh, like OU, big football culture, like this is South. And so it was exactly like what I wanted, right? It was like tiny little city in the South. You know, it was just so fun. Everything was different.
Sure.
I think like rhythms and just like routine was just so different, you know, and but it was a really fun, like looking back now, it was kind of like a gap year for me, because it allowed me to just process kind of like, okay,
sure, what
do I want to do with my life?
Yeah.
And I was thinking like I was already a senior in Brazil, so I just needed like certain credits to graduate. So I just kind of like pick like, oh, chemistry, I really like chemistry, so I can do that, and I will get like the science credit, and I need a math, and it's just like a math, I'm really good at like geometry, I'm just gonna pick that. And so it was just like really easy, but it was really sweet. Like it was definitely like looking back now, like there was definitely moments of like culture shock that as a high schooler, like I was like, what, you know, 16 turning 17, and you know, you think at that time like, oh, I'm so mature, I know everything. And looking back now, I'm like, oh, that was like extreme like culture shock. Like I was living through it. It was really sweet. I ended up with a family that was really, really kind. They loved me really, really well. I still meet them. I call them like my American family. Had 3 brothers in that family unit here, that my host family, right? And so it was really sweet. It was definitely like high school here is just it's something, I don't know. You can have like literally everything in high school, like, and so it was a fun time. But it was definitely different than at home. Sure. Definitely different than college.
So, like even the everyday small, like you said, routines were different. Like in what sense were they different?
Yeah, I think like, you know, in the sense of like things that we do, what we eat, like all those little things, right? Okay. And so like in Brazil, like the way it was like in school, in high school, was like you have, I don't know, like so many hours per week, and out of those hours, like so many classes are biology, so many classes are like philosophy, sociology, math, you know, Portuguese, whatever, literature. And here you have like the same schedule every day. And that was like weird to me. It took me a while, but I was like, man, I'm having the same classes every day. Like, I feel like this actually helps me to learn because I'm repeating every day. And so some things were really cool. Whenever in the spring semester, I started playing soccer, and we would practice like every day. Like in Brazil, like huge soccer culture. But even like the schools and stuff, you have it maybe like twice a week. Right. It's like extracurricular Monday, Wednesday, or Thursday, Friday, you know, or Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday. But then here it was like you're having these like practices, like systems and tactical level, and and all of that, and it's every day, and I was like, this is different, you know. But it was a good time. It was fun. It was sweet.
Right.
Road tripping, I got the privilege to do quite a few road trips. Like that's something that like in Brazil is just like doesn't happen. Like
Sure.
like kind of does, but not really. Like people do it, but not like here. And so I got to see a bit of the Midwest with my host family at the time, and that was like, wow, like this is a road trip. Like this is different, you know. So do those like I say routines, but like even like things that we do, the way we behave, things that we say, the way we say things, it's just different, and it's just unique.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I guess there's that very unique nature to just moving to a different country, right? Like especially at that age, it just hits you very differently. Do you feel like, and this is probably like a tangential but slightly dumb question, do you feel like people back home would give you shit for saying soccer?
No, like back at home, like in Brazil. Back at home, like everybody would like we know, like we learn, like whenever we're learning English, like hey, if you say like football, for them it means like soccer.
Okay.
Right, like, and so if you're in America, like there is that different word. Now what was confusing is like you go to like England, they're gonna say football, and it's like that's what they mean. And so I think the hard part within that context for me was like coming here and then being like, I love American football, right? And I'll be like, I know the difference between football and soccer.
Right.
And so I'll be like, oh, I love football. And then because people know I'm from Brazil, they're like, oh, you mean soccer, right? And I was like, no, like I don't want to be rude, but like, did I say soccer? And so it was kind of like, and I would be like, no, I actually mean like American football, quarterback, receivers, like kickers. I love it. And they're like, okay.
Right.
But every time, even until like college, is like, oh, I love football. And they're like, oh, you sure mean like soccer? I'm like, well, I actually think soccer is kind of, don't murder me, but I actually think soccer's kind of boring. And then people will be like, "Wow, but you're from Brazil. How come?" Like,
I mean, it's okay. Like, there's people in India who don't like cricket, and that's fine too.
Do you like cricket?
Oh, I do, but I'm not one of those who doesn't. But it's completely fine to not like cricket, or not like soccer if you're from Brazil. Like and to each their own, right?
Yeah,
like it's okay.
Granted, like man, World Cups comes in. Oh. We're in, like we're in. We're gonna watch it. We're gonna cheer. It's fun.
Yeah.
But like on my like leisure time, like I'll probably not go out of my way to watch a soccer match.
Right, you're not keeping up with what's happening on a daily basis. Like if Neymar is moving from Paris to like Saudi or whatever.
I'm not too into it. Like I'll hear about it, especially like Neymar, Messi, Ronaldo. You hear about those moves, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. But then there's also things like players that come back, go back to Brazil, or players that move teams. And I'm like, what? Since when he's been playing there? And people are like, oh gosh, Pedro, you're so dated. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. No, that's okay though. That's completely fine. The reason I asked that question is because I feel like on the other side, like Europeans are much more hell-bent on that. Like they get, well, not everybody, I guess that's a bit of a generalized statement, but there are people who tend to get frustrated when you're like calling football soccer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought that'd be funny.
Yeah.
To sort of explore.
Apparently, because I was like really curious. I was like, man, like like why do you call like American football like? And so apparently, and I need to do more research on it. But apparently, whenever the game started, like the most amount of points you could get was through the kicking, through like the field goals and stuff.
Sure.
And so that's whenever they call it like football. And I think as the game progressed and evolved and changed, the rules changed, the point system changed. Kicking was just kind of like, okay, it's part of it now, but but the name preserved, and so okay, cool. And I think it's like one of those little quirky little things that I'm like, cool.
Yeah. And I can't remember like the specifics of what I'd read somewhere, and if anybody who knows about this can correct me, you're more than welcome to. But I think actually initially like European football was called soccer, but then they changed it to football or something like that. I feel like I read that somewhere.
That would be interesting too. Yeah, I don't know.
I haven't looked that up as much. But yeah, like what other sort of cultural things did you sort of appreciate about this part of the world, like Oklahoma.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like, especially in Oklahoma, just like with my background, coming from a city that's 3 million people, right? And I think, like, there is an aspect that we're living this, like, worldwide. And there is a very big presence in Oklahoma, but I think, like, in the world right now, we're just very rushed. It's just like time is money, you know?
Like,
yeah. And you're like boom, boom, boom. And I think in Oklahoma, like Piedmont, small school, it was just a different pace. And so I really appreciated that about Oklahoma and about my time there. But I think even like people would say like, oh, why Oklahoma? Like out of all the places, like why Oklahoma? We're literally like the most white people, or like, you know, and I say that like just, you know, voicing what people said, but just like, well, we're so boring. We don't have any diversity. We don't have any culture. And I think that's such a like disservice to like the culture of Oklahoma. Like, I have a professor here at the University of Central Oklahoma, and he's just phenomenal. He's just like fabulous. And he's like super into like culture. And the way that he phrased it to us is like culture is like water for a fish. You're so deep into it that you don't even realize, right? For the fish, it's like water. Like what water? I'm just like, it's just like this. And I think with Oklahoma, like there's such a deep culture. And so like you come in here and you start seeing people with like boots and cowboy hats and trucks. And like, yes, it might be very like, you know, from the Caucasian people that were here in the land. And there is all types of, you know, depth in it. But there is a culture in Oklahoma. Like there is a culture that comes with it. And that's just like one example. There's so much more, right? From like more bombing to other things that have happened. Like Tulsa, the Tulsa massacre and all those things. And those things really shape our culture. But in the midst of it, sometimes we're so like going with the flow of it that we don't see it. We don't stop to see it. And so whenever I came, I was like, man, like this is really different than Brazil, right? I can appreciate that. Like, and then just even like other like little things that just learn to appreciate is like, one, things are just tend to be a bit slower. And I think like in the grand scheme, again, we are living in a life that's really fast, and I don't think that's probably the way that it should go. But it was more of like, oh, we can breathe, you know, and we're kind of like in the country, and and there was an aspect of just people are just kind of friendly, you know, which in a way reminded me a lot of my city. But then it's just like, I don't know, I think even like this summer I went to West Africa, and I spent the summer there, and I think like what I've learned was like, okay, I need to go, and instead of going like, oh, this is better, this is worse, this is like, this culture is better, this culture is worse, it's just kind of like, okay, there's going to be things in every culture that's going to be, we can learn from it. There's things that we can look at and be like, this is maybe not like morally right, or, you know, maybe there is a way of doing things better. And there's some things in the middle that's just like, this is just different. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different, right? And so, but there was a lot like in Oklahoma that I came to appreciate. Like I think I had this thought that was like, people in America were like removed from family's life, right? Like, oh, they come, they graduate, they go to college, and they go live their lives, and I had this like this thought that was like put in my mind that was not the reality in Oklahoma, right? Like, no, here like pretty much like a lot of the people that I know, like family is like so important. And like all my friends in college, like freshman year, they're going back to see their families pretty much on a weekend, like weekly basis. And it's like, oh, they do love their families. There's like more things. I was like, oh, I can learn from them. Like the way they love their families, like that's really beautiful. And not saying that I don't love my family, like I love my family, you know. But it's like, oh, they're like, and so I think there was a lot of things like that you start thinking about it and you start putting the pieces in the puzzle together. And like, oh, this is really neat. Yeah, I can learn from it,
Right.
And so,
And I think sometimes it's also noticing that might be the culture of New York, but that's not necessarily the culture of Oklahoma.
100%.
And another sort of interesting correlation I wanted to make to what you said about the fish being inside or underwater. Like the fish underwater doesn't know what's above the water, right? What's in the outside world. So yeah, that's very true. And I think culture is so nuanced to sometimes we forget that different doesn't mean bad. Like, different just means different. That's it. And like, yeah, go ahead.
No, you finish your thought.
I was just gonna say, like, it's because it's a new experience, your brain can sometimes react to it differently to where it feels like it's not right. But that's sort of where you get to learn those things and sort of understand that this is how life is in other places.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you don't mind my asking, what part of Africa did you go to?
So I went to Kenya.
Okay. And what was that like?
So yeah, it was very different. Like, and like from the bat, just even with the I guess the parameter that I gave earlier, like one example of one thing that they did really good that I really learned from it was like, man, like community there, the way that they do, like they have that thing to the T compared to America and even Brazil. Like Brazil, we are pretty friendly and all that, but like compared to America, like I'm not saying that America's worse, but there's probably like a more like individualistic type of
absolutely.
And countries in the East tend to have more of like a group thing,
a collective nature of
and
living.
So like for example, like one of the things that they would say is like here, like Patrick came and set it up, everything, and this is his equipment. If like in Kenya they were saying like, oh, so like when did you set up our equipment? And it's just like that like thought of like, oh, this is really sweet. Or if I were to like, hey, do you want to come to our home? Like it's already implying like, hey, like I got you. And so that was like something that was really cool. But then on the other hand, something that was like, oh, like this is maybe not the best, and we can learn like corruption in Kenya is like huge. It's like one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and
politically speaking.
Yeah, and it's like and you're like, okay, like how did we get here, right? And how can we preserve the rights of people and social justice and those things, right? Like there's these things in Kenya called matatus, and it's like buses, like public buses, public transportation, and like the police officers would stop them and ask for like chai, like give me chai, and like there was not even like a thought in the driver's head of like, oh, is this right for me to do? It's just like, oh, here's the money, take it, and like give the bribe, right? And it's like, wow, and that would go all the way to like presidential things. Like while I was there was a lot of like riots and things like that, and just like political turmoil, because of like corruption and like, I mean, I didn't do as much of the research as some people may have, and so I don't want to speak like, oh, this is right, this is wrong. It was just like from an outsider observing.
Yeah.
And then there were things that were just different, right? Like, let me think of like something that was just like, this is just kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
Like,
while you are thinking of that, I will just make a quick point in what you said about the corruption aspect of it, right? I think corruption is there everywhere, like regardless of where you go. But I think in places that are impoverished and as people like to describe third world countries, right? Like the corruption is much more in your face. Yeah. Like even in parts of India, you see that happen in front of you. You're like, oh, okay, like I guess this is just the way it is. Whereas in America, like not to say that corruption doesn't happen, but it's a lot more subtle. Like you probably don't see it behind. You don't see it in front of you. It's not in your face as much. Again, that's just my opinion, and maybe there are like things in America that happen up front.
And I agree. And it was like it was hard because it was like for example, like, and this is one thing that's like just different. Like here in America is like, oh, if you go to college or not. Right, there's that option of like not going to college. Like in Brazil, like if you have the resources to go to college, why wouldn't you?
That's the same in India.
While here it's like if you have the resources to go to college, you have a choice.
Yeah.
You know, in Kenya it's like they really value education, but then there are people like graduating that they don't have jobs because it's not necessarily about your certification and your like the qualities that you're bringing and your knowledge and your experience, but it's about who you know. Which in part I think that it's right with everybody, like in every country,
it applies in
everywhere.
every country, right?
But like there it was like very much so like if you don't know somebody who's in, you're not gonna get in. And like you have like these servers and Uber drivers and all those people who have like masters at times, and don't have jobs.
Right.
And it's not because they're not qualified. It's just because the system, is different. And so, and that kind of plays a little bit on the corruption part too. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, man, like everything, like it's going to be different. And, there's definitely like historical context, socioeconomical context, all those things, like types of government, the culture behind, like all those things end up playing a role. One of my favorite classes that I've taken for my major was like economic growth and development. And we just pretty much did that research of like, we're going to pick up a country and we're just going to analyze it. And like a lot of it, like geography is so correlated with like historical context and so correlated with like how it shapes, right? Like you look at countries like in the middle of like a continent, unless they have like extremely like rich wealth and oil and stuff like that, like it's gonna be harder for them. But the parts of the continents that are like in the coast, you have ports, like those are the parts that probably evolved more, even from like our history, right? You look at the history books, like which parts developed first, or the parts where explorers came in.
Yeah.
And that's just like, that's not just saying like, hey, exploring and all those things is right, like but just stating the fact of how it is, like Rio in Brazil, like pretty developed city, and it grew pretty fast, and there's a lot of problems, but it got way more developed than a tiny little village in the very middle of like North Brazil, where it's like right in the center of the continent, right? And that's because Rio is like right on the coast,
right?
And so it has really good climate, right? And so it's like all those things I think influence, and
absolutely,
and it's really interesting, like looking how they all play a role in the whole, right?
For sure, yeah. I think when you go digging into all of those things, you sort of realize the depth of how all of this works, and like there's a lot of nuance associated with culture too, right? Like the other thing that I was thinking about earlier, when you mentioned the cultural aspect, is that while there's a collective culture of a place, there's also a culture within a family, and that influences the way you look at things and all of that kind of stuff. So it's like very minute influences that affect the way you just look at life in general, or like look at how things work and so on. So I guess understanding that is also quite important to realize, is that okay, like the whole corruption example that you mentioned in Kenya, it does feel quite icky, but unfortunately in places like that, everybody's just trying to make their own bread. Now I'm not justifying it, I'm not saying that that's right, but that's just the unfortunate truth, is that everybody is trying to take some, I mean, some people are genuinely trying to take bread home, some people are doing other things, but that's not, I'm not the person, the authority to judge that. But it's just, I guess, realizing those things as well that sort of help improve your understanding of things, because otherwise it can be very much like, oh, this is wrong, people are messed up, this, that, and the other. But
and even like looking like in Kenya, or like even Brazil, or like countries like that, and not justifying the reasons why there is poverty and things like that and corruption, but like you look at those countries and it's like, whenever it came to like, and again, it's just like a fact, that's just kind of how like history played out, and we kind of inherited. But like in Brazil, I can say like with confidence, like Portugal came in, took all the gold, took all the stuff, and left, right? And
Right.
it's like, well, there's gonna be problems, and with any country that was like a colony, like the United States, like it's the one out of the curve, right? Like, which is like, what? How did that happen?
Yeah.
But and I'm not the best with like, I guess like that area of history. I'm not the most qualified to speak on it, but you look at those things and you see how that plays out, and it affects, and to like get out of that, the consequences take a long time, and it takes like a while to like it's gonna be another 100, 300, 400,
exactly,
I don't know how many years.
No, you saying that just reminded me of like India, for example, too. Like we were under British occupation for like 2 centuries, a little more than 2 centuries, I think, almost 3 centuries if I'm not mistaken. And like coming out of some of the things that, so India was regarded, if I'm not mistaken, India was regarded as one of the richest countries in that time, and like we went to one of the richest countries in the world to like being completely depleted of our resources, poor people everywhere, a partition that split India into multiple parts, all of that kind of stuff that, like we're still reeling from the effects of it in some sense, I'd say. I mean that as a region, as a whole, like, because India and Pakistan were not two different countries. It was all India. So was Bangladesh was part of India too. So, like, there's all, like, I guess, I won't get too much into the semantics of it all, but, right, there's a lot of those things that you can notice that we're still reeling from. And it takes time to get out of those things. And to us in our lifetime, like, 70 years or 100 years can seem like a lot, but if you look at it from the timeline of the world, like that's a drop in the ocean. In some sense,
it takes time to heal.
It takes a lot of time to heal those things. But like what was the reason you went to Kenya, if you don't mind asking?
So I went on a mission trip. So I went there. I'm a Christian, so I went there to just like make disciples, and follow the commandments of Jesus. So
what was that experience like in terms of talking to people? And let me, I guess, I'm quite curious about this in that sense. So if there's anything you don't want to talk about, just let me know.
I'm down. I'll talk as much as I can. And
got it. Do you like go and approach people who follow Christianity or who are practitioners of Christianity as well, or is it just like anybody and everybody you can talk to?
I think it kind of comes like, even before answering that, it kind of comes down to like why we're going, right? And so like straight from the bat, like I believe like God created a perfect world with righteousness. And that's a very like Christian-y word, like righteousness. Nobody says that, but what I mean by that is like right relationships. I like to think of the word righteousness as like right relationship, right? God created everybody to have right relationships with God and with other people.
Sure, excuse me. Yeah.
And clearly, at some point, there was a disconnect, right?
Something right.
And in Christianity, or in Christian tradition, we talk about sin. That's a big word, big Christian-y word. That when I think of sin, I think of like rebellion against God, right? Rebellion against that perfect intent. And we believe that because of that rebellion, like there's death, there's disease, there's like all that, like and I say death not in the sense of like, oh, you die, but there's like this death. There's this like corruption, there's this pollution that's just contaminating everything around us, and we see it like it, and that's not like from a Christian person, or a person who doesn't believe in any gods, or a person who believes in different religion. Like we can see it, like something that's bad, and you don't have to agree on it, but we can see that something is going wrong.
There are some problems.
There are some problems, and and like, and so with that, like I believe that God like made it a way for us to like be restored to like that right relationships, and reflect those right relationships in a proper and beautiful way, the way that it was intended, and that's through Jesus, right? And so I believe that Jesus is God, and like he came down, born out of a virgin, Son of God, and lived a perfect life. And he was tempted to be rebellious, right? He was tempted to do all those things but he didn't.
Right.
And so I believe that he died, was crucified,
Mm-hmm.
and because he was perfect, he deserved to be with God. Not like us, right? Like, we're not perfect. We don't deserve it. That's the reality. Like, you know, like, I don't deserve to be with God. And so, within that, I believe that, and, the Bible, or, the book that Christians use to follow Jesus, and the accounts of Jesus, like, Jesus says, like, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Sure.
No one can go to the Father or to God and inherit eternal life. No, you're good. Except through me. And so I believe that it goes from like repentance of our rebellion, like acknowledging, like, okay, God, like, I am rebellious
Like,
against
you mean
you.
the service is a way of repentance?
Yeah, like, like, and that's like, I think one is like a realization of like, okay, I'm rebellious.
Sure.
But then it's also like a process of like constantly like, man, I try to repent like on a daily basis, right? Because I know like on a daily basis I fall short. And then acceptance of like Jesus' gift, right? Have you ever heard of C.S. Lewis?
No, can you elaborate on that?
C.S. Lewis is the person who wrote Narnia, in the Narnia series, and he's really famous for a book called Mere Christianity, Problem of Pain, Screwtape Letters. Like, he has a whole collection.
Got it.
He talks about like Christianity as like, there's a lot of religions, there's a lot of beliefs, and a lot of them, it's about like what you do. In Christianity, like, he summarizes as like grace. There's this joke and this story of like, there's all these theologians from different like religions trying to put together like what it means to follow God, and like how each religion is different, and trying to branch out.
Sure.
They look at him and they're like, what do you think? Like, you're the Christian. Like, how is your religion different than all the other ones? He stands up, goes to the chalkboard, and writes this big word like grace, right? And so, in that, like in the story that I'm telling and painting, is like, I think is like the grace of God that's given to us, and that we, you have two ways of living. You can crown yourself and say like, oh, I'm gonna do what I want, or you can like surrender and accept that grace and make Jesus the Lord of your life. And so, within that, like, Jesus commands, like in one of the writings that one of his followers wrote about, like him, about his life, one of the last things that he says to them before we believe he departs from heaven is like, hey, like, all authority have been given to me, therefore go and make followers, right? Make disciples of every nation, tribe, and tongue, teaching them how to obey the things that I've commanded. And so I think like within that commandment, it's like not only just like, oh, go to the nations, but like even like here, like, how am I going and making disciples? Because if I truly believe that like there's only one way to go to heaven, and that's through Jesus, and I believe that everybody else who's not putting their faith in Jesus, like, is gonna be separated from God, and I'm not sharing, do I truly believe what I'm saying? And not only do I truly believe, but like, do I care about those people who don't believe in Jesus, right? Because like, if for my belief, like, somebody who doesn't put their faith in Jesus is not going to be united with God, like, but I'm not sharing with them, like, hey, can I tell you about like how to be united with God? Like, that either means that I don't believe what I'm saying, or it means that I don't care about that person. And so within all of that, like, going back to your question, right? Because I think that's like the context of why we go on missions, like, why. And I say mission trips, and like, I think the mission trips is like good for us to see, like, there's different contexts, there's different beliefs, there's different things. And like, honestly, like, it's not going to be you hopping on a plane and going to a different city, a different country, that's going to make you a missionary, right? You should be going as you go, one translation puts, make disciples, And so in Kenya, the context, like, and again, like, context and culture plays a huge role in how we do it, right? Like, it was in a way, it was very similar to America, right? Or even like Brazil, like, everybody's so like, called Christian, They maybe tell you like, oh, I'm a Christian. And you're like, okay, cool. Like, what does that look like? You know, and it's like, well, I go to church on Sundays, and it's like, oh, that's cool. Like, but I don't think you're like a Christian. Like, a Christian is like, you know, the word, and you know, we don't have the knowledge to dictate who it is. That's God alone. But we can see, like, Jesus says, like, you know, you will know people who love me by the fruit that they bear. And so, like, you know, like, Christian, the word means like a little Christ, like a follower and an imitator of Jesus, right? And so I think way more than just like going to church is like who is, you know, devoting themselves to look more like Jesus, you know, in the end. And so and like the Christian faith, there's like a lot of nuance into it, but like there is like, you know, it can be easily be distorted to this like feel good religion.
What do you mean by that?
Like through so the Bible is divided, and that's where I get really nerdy. But like the Bible is divided in like,
get all nerdy you want.
Okay,
it's okay,
dude. Don't tempt me. So the Bible is divided in like essentially like the Christian Bible.
Okay.
Like 21st century Christian Bible is divided into like two segments, like the Old Testament, the New Testament.
Right.
And so the Old Testament itself comes from the Jewish tradition that's called the Tanakh. Okay. And so the Tanakh comes from the three writings: the Torah, the Nehavim, and the Ketuvim. So the Torah is the first 5 books, the Law of Moses. So in the Christian tradition, is the same, like translated from Hebrew, but the Torah is like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's the exact same first 5 books that we have. So that's the Torah. And then you have writings. And those are like some of the prophets, and then some of other books like Joshua, Judges. And then you have like the prophets in the end, and that's like some of the so-called writings that we have. And so you mash all that together, you have like your Old Testament. In the Old Testament, there's a lot of like promises from God, like that he gives to his people and written by his people. We believe that all scripture is godly inspired and godly like breathed. And so we believe that people, like servants of God, like the followers of God through history, wrote down the words that God wanted them to use it. And so differently than a lot of books, like holy books, the Christian Bible is like, the way I like to put it is like a reliable collection of 66 books, right? It's not like it's not just like one big book. In the whole, it is one book, but it's a reliable collection of 66 books.
It's like a compilation of books.
Yeah, a compilation that, you know, those books reflect like historical and divine things that happen through history, and they're written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other people who were also eyewitnesses.
Right.
Which makes it really interesting. Like, just even like, you know, if somebody wanted, like, if you write something like, oh, we're in the library and then a meteor fell outside, like there's gonna be a ton of people to be like, ton of other eyewitnesses gonna be like, no, that's not true. And so, you know, I think that's important to understand too, is like, okay, the Bible is a reliable collection, historical documents written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses that all point to God. And so within that, during the Old Testament and in sections of like the Old Testament, there's a lot of promises that point to life that's given through Jesus, that point to like everlasting life. Now, whenever you're reading something like that, right, it can be really easy to pick a verse right here and try to imply it to our lives right now. And whenever you do that, you're completely ignoring like this meta narrative of like creation, fall, and reconciliation. You're completely like ignoring the narrative that's painted out through all the 66 books. You're completely ignoring the context and time there. You're completely ignoring like the chapters and chapters that come before and the chapters that go after. And so within that, it's really easy for us to make the Bible sound like what we want to hear. And I think like that's one of the extreme like problems in America right now is like we can make the Bible sound like what we want to hear and take it completely out of context. And in my mission trip, like that's a lot of what we experienced. A lot of like, oh, but like, you know, like Jesus says like, oh, ask and you receive. So why can't I just ask for money and be rich? And I'm like, well, let's look at the context, you know. Let's look at what Jesus is talking about in that part. Like he's talking about like being with God and like God caring for you. And he has a whole section on prayer before that. And so it was just kind of like we would talk with like to finally go back to your question, but like we would talk with pretty much everybody and everybody who wanted to talk and be willing to talk. Like we're not gonna shove down your mouth. That's like that's not the way of Jesus, right?
Yeah, you want to be respectful.
Yeah, 100%, and like you know, like agree on disagreements. Like it's okay to disagree. We don't want to like, and if and I think one of the biggest problems is like people try to shove Christianity down other people's throats, and like that's not what Jesus did. What's the way? Like, you know, those who have ears, like they will hear it.
Yeah,
and those who want to, they will follow. And so like also pray if they don't want to hear, like again, because I deeply care for that person, and because in my belief, like there's only one way to life everlasting. Like I'll pray for you, like man, I'll be like literally on my knees praying for that person. But like if they don't want to hear, like we're not gonna keep on bothering. So we'd go and like just chat it up with people and see how they're doing and connect with them and be like, I like to be pretty upfront with it. Personally, I don't want to do like, you know, ways to trick people into like, oh, I'm gonna do this and then I'm gonna tell you about Jesus, like or guilt trip you into now you have to hear me about them. So I just go and be like, hey man, like followers of Jesus, like would you like to talk? Or like, hey, we're just going around praying for people, can we pray for you, right? And through that, just like we established a lot of relationships and just like let's chat it up. And more often than not, I feel like we learn more from those people. Like we met a lot of people who were like legitimately like followers of Jesus, devoted, that just had a lot of knowledge, and they taught us a lot, and it was really beautiful. And it was like the body of Christ, right? The church, like big C church, like all coming together. It was really sweet. And so, but no, we'd kind of go to everyone and all of it. One of the friends that I made, he was a follower of Islam, and it was just really sweet. He got to share a bit of what he believed. We got to share what we believe. And, he just got to connect. We got to eat dinner with him and cook food for him, and he would give us water like all the time. And in the context that we were in, you had to go and buy water from like a little store like down the road all the time, and he would just give us like his water, and it was just like really, really sweet. And we got to just share him, and he had a lot of, in Kenya they speak English, but this friend in particular, he was from a different tribe.
Got it. Yeah, because there's many different tribes within Kenya.
There's a lot of different tribes within Kenya, and he was from a tribe that was very removed, and he had just gone to the city, and so he was like learning English kind of as he goes, and it was really sweet, and we got to like really just have a good time together. I got to pray for him, and it was sweet. And so, but no, we go to everybody who was willing, right? And I think that's kind of how we went.
Gotcha. A lot to kind of explore there.
Yeah, I just sorry.
No. Don't apologize. No. Don't apologize. I like the fact that you went into that depth, because I feel like that gives us the opportunity to sort of explore many different aspects of what you just shared, right? So, firstly, like when you sort of talked about like the bad times, if you will, it reminded me of what we call Kali Yuga in Hinduism. And that we're living in Kali Yuga right now, where sort of people might be removed from God a little more, and again, I'm not the Hindu police, so please, like, I might be wrong about some things.
And, I'm also not. I'm just mere follower of Jesus.
Right. So I might be wrong. I apologize if I'm wrong. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's sentiments. I'm just sharing what I know. And if there's room for me to, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more for me to learn. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to turn this about me, but turn this into something about me. But there is a lot of room for me to learn too, and that's something that like really intrigues me, which is why I'm quite interested by this aspect of the conversation, like talking about religion and things like that. And I don't know if it's fair or unfair or right or wrong, but I do see a lot of similarities. And again, I don't know Christianity or Islam to the depth that I know Hinduism. I mean, there's still a lot more depth to explore in Hinduism as well, for me personally. But there are a lot of similarities that I see, like what you call the bad times, like we see as Kali Yuga, what you all call surrendering to Jesus. We talk about surrendering to Krishna. So like, there's a lot of those similarities there. That I have this internal belief that religions are mostly the same, in the sense that like the principles that we preach or talk about, it's just a different delivery system, if you will. That's like a very, I guess, surface level way of putting it, and there's a ton of nuance associated with that. So I'm not necessarily diminishing the nuance of it, but that's kind of like a belief I have. But yeah, I'm open to like people telling me no, that's not the case. But so far, with whatever examples I've seen, it sort of has just strengthened my belief about that even more. But anyway, you mentioned the fact that, right, you guys you don't try and force anybody, and sometimes people don't want to talk about it. I wonder if some of that fear also comes from what has happened in the past. Because I mean, I guess there's no, like, at least we can talk about it in an Indian context from what I know. There's a ton of stories of how, like, some people would go to, like, landowners, but like very poor people, and be like, hey, we'll give you this piece of land, just jump ship, and you'll be taken care of for the rest of your life. And in that point in time, like, I can empathize with the action that that poor family might have taken ages ago, because for them this was generational wealth that was just being served up to them on a plate. If they chose to believe in a religion that they didn't know about, which is the unfortunate part, right? Is that, and I mean, I don't know how common this is now in some parts of the world. Probably not as common as it was before, but like conversions were a thing, right? Where people would go give you something to like jump ship and change religions and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like that fear still exists. Like, especially, I don't know how much with the younger generation as much, in all honesty, but I definitely feel like our parents' generation and their parents' generation, there is that fear still about conversions and how, you could be pulled in and like this, that, and the other. So yeah, so I wonder if that's sort of like the fear that people tend to have.
I think it's not necessarily like derived out of fear.
Okay.
I think you just derive out of motive, right? Like,
okay.
I don't think in anywhere, like in the accounts of Jesus, you could justify that, right? Like,
can you elaborate on that a little further?
So, like, we look at our history
book
and how history played out, to go back again to history, but like, like Brazil, colonized by Portugal, Christian, which there were like Catholics, and in Kenya, colonized by England, and they had a saying, it was like, they took our land and they left the Bible, right? And I think, again, like that feel good, they justified like sinful, like rebellious acts in the name of God.
Right.
And, we're taking the land. And like, because we're bringing the Bible, like, we're missionaries, right? But I don't think there was any heart behind of it. And granted, like, there may was, and I don't know every single person who went.
Sure.
And there are like many accounts up to like 1300s of like people who like gave their lives to go and like share what they believe in, like parts of the world that like didn't have any church or any Christians, and they were legitimately like doing that out of like, that was their motivation. But I think there's like all of that. I don't think it's like the way we do it now is necessarily derived out of fear that would happen.
Okay.
It's,
I mean, like people,
or I think like the way we should think about it, like now, it's not like, oh, I don't want to do it that way because of fear. It's just, I don't want to do that way because it's wrong. Period. Right?
No, I mean, I guess what I was trying to get at was like, say you approached me. I don't want to talk to you because of the fear of, oh, you're trying to convert me. That's what I meant to say.
I see what you're saying.
Sorry.
No, yeah.
But that's what I was trying to get at, was that, like, when, I mean, I hate, because I spoke I spoke to a Mormon on the podcast, and I remember, like, I know people, and again, I'm not trying to blame anybody, because sometimes you just don't want to be in that conversation, and I understand that. People walk away. Like, when you see a Mormon coming from, like, your left eye view, you're like, I am going right, even though I have to go left. I'm just going to go all the way around and, like, not have that conversation, because I don't want to. I can respect their decision, that's their choice. But, like, I mean,
I think, like, from that point of view, like, like, oh, if people don't want to come talk with you about it, it's like, that's why, like, I want to represent Jesus the best of the ability I can. Like, gentle and humble in heart.
Sure.
Like a friend. Like, and, like, man, like, my hope is that I, like, even, like, people that I met here, like, I have a ton of friends that don't believe in Jesus, and, like, my hope truly is that they will believe in Jesus. I love them, and those are my beliefs, and so I hope that they will. But in the end of the day, like, I'm gonna be a friend for them, right? And it's like if, like, I will speak of Jesus, and I'll be bold about it, and I'll pray for opportunities, and I'll try to share as much as I can. But, like, if I ever perceive, like, man, me sharing is actually hindering them coming closer to Jesus, then not, I push. And so I think there is a lot of, like, closeness because of how sharing about Jesus has been done maybe in the wrong way in the past. Maybe in an impersonal way, right? I think it has to be, like, a very personal thing, right?
Sure.
Like, I cannot share this out of, like, obligation. If I'm sharing out of, like, and there's a sense of, like, yeah, man, like, it's a command, it's good, like, but it's a command because I believe it's so good. And so I think it's not necessarily, like, shared out of obligation, but shared out of love,
right?
And so within that, it comes from, like, man, like, let's go play soccer, let's go get food, like, let's become friends, right? And I think, like, that's the majority of it. Like, hey, in the meantime, like, my hope is, like, oh, Peter, like, and, like, why don't you do this, or why don't you do this, or, oh, because, I'm a follower of Jesus, and like, oh, why are you not anxious? Well, because I trust in God, right? Like, and yes, there are times that I fail and I get anxious, but, like, a lot of, like, sharing Jesus is going to be the way that you live. Like, we're called to be holy in the Bible, right? Be holy. Again, not a Christian word that, like, if you don't know, it's like, what does it mean? It means to be set apart. Like, you're supposed to be like a beam of light.
To be a good in the world. Yeah. A good force of good in the world.
Like, like, push back darkness. And so, in that sense, like, I think there's a lot of, like, man, like, there's a way on sharing Jesus, and there's a way of pushing your faith on somebody.
Right.
And a lot of the time, oh, okay.
Okay.
I think it's a fire truck.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times, like, there is going to be a time for sharing Jesus, like, one-on-one, and be like, hey, man, can I tell you about it? Would you be willing to, like, look in the Bible with me? Like,
right.
Cool. But then there's going to be a lot of just, like, conversational, like, right? Like, oh, why do you rest, like, a whole day of your week? Or, and not saying, but, like, why do you do such things? Why, like, oh, I'm not eating because I'm fasting. Oh, why do you fast? Things like that. There's more, and those are just two examples that came to my mind. But, like, there's way more. Like, oh, why are you so happy all the time? I remember, like, when I didn't grow up as a Christian. Like, I was, like, I was in a Christian context, but didn't grow up following Jesus. And
you were born into a Christian family, but you weren't practicing it as a.
Yeah, sort of. Like, I was born in a family that call themselves Christians.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
But I would say that they're not per se practicing, or, and even in Brazil, I think a lot of it is like, oh, like, I think they were Christians, and so I guess we're Christians, and I guess we have like Christian hall. Oh, we're Christians, cool. What does that mean? Oh, I have no idea. That was kind of where I was born. And the first guy that I met, that was actually like a follower of Jesus. Was here at UCO. Was not even like in Piedmont. It was at UCO, and I saw him, and I was like, man, I just want to slap his face and be like, wake up! Like life is not joyful. Like life is bad. Life is sad. Why are you so happy all the time, right? And he's like, man, because I follow Jesus. I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And as I've come to my faith, and as I've started like my journey as a follower of Christ, and as I've been like in the process of like looking more like Jesus or sanctification, like I see that joy, right? And it's like, man, like I hope people see that joy in me, like that love for life, that love for others, and I hope it overflows, and I hope it is a beam of light that is apparent in this like vast darkness, right? Like a beam of light in a really dark room, it's gonna stand out like crazy. And so I remember being like, man, like what is this dude up to? Like, why is he so happy all the time? Like, slap out of it, wake up, And it's not that he was crazy; he was just on fire for Jesus. Right. So, like that would do a lot, But I definitely agree. Like, and I think that's why, our generation, like my generation, that claims to be followers of Jesus, they need to take that with like honor, but that's like a really like, okay, there's a weight to it now because you're representing like Jesus, and if people are looking at Christians and being like, oh, I don't want to come talk with them, it's like, what are we doing? It's like, oh man, like I want to be like friendly, I want to be being with light, like and so I think that's like a big call that we have now is like maybe fix something that has been left out from the past, and it's like and we cannot fix anything. It's gonna be God who's gonna do it, but like we have this responsibility to uphold what he commands us to do. And so I don't know if that kind of answers, but
it makes sense in the sense that I also wanted to add that some of those fears don't just come from the present, they come from the past, right? Like what you said. So
super true.
It's like something that again people would have to be comfortable talking about, and then if they're not, they're not, like, and that's just the reality of it.
And it goes back to the saying of like one bad apple is gonna make all the apples stink, right? And like if I were to come here to UCO and like my first day, I just see something like somebody's so rude to me, like one of the staff members is just so rude to me. I'm just like, man, don't go to UCO, they're all so rude. Right. Don't do this, they're all so rude. Like it was my personal experience, and it's hard because like, and that's like, I remember whenever I was coming here as an exchange program, like in high school, people are like, hey, what you do is gonna matter, because the way you behave and the way you portray yourself, it's gonna reflect on the way people think of Brazil. Right. And in a way, it's true, right? Because then they're gonna think Brazil. Oh, who's the Brazilian I know? Pedro. Oh, that guy was a douche. Oh, Brazilians are just douches, or like, oh no, that guy was like really nice. Like, man, he was so friendly. Like, if everybody in Brazil is like that, like, I want to go back. And so, like, I think there has been in the past a lot of people in the name of Jesus that claim to be followers of Jesus that just made it dirty for everybody else, and not justifying, but it's just like,
it's just what happened.
It's just what happened. And, right. And now it's like, okay, like, how can I fix it, right? And like, okay, cool. So
another thing that you said that I found was quite interesting was this, or at least that was my understanding of it, was how people are living out the interpretation or their interpretation of what they're reading in the books, and how they're not understanding the true context behind it. This is something that I'd heard on a podcast, and I usually ask this question when we're having a conversation about religion. But you sort of hit on that even before we got to that point. So I was like, okay, it's interesting that you're talking about that, because how truly can we live by the book? And the reason I asked that is because at the end of the day, there are signs of human greed. There are signs of like people. Foundationally, I guess human greed. That sort of wants us to be ahead of other people, sabotaging relationships for personal benefit, all of that kind of stuff. That happens everywhere, right? Like, shit, it happens in families, like, between siblings who want more from their parents as well, or whatever. Like, that, I guess, is synonymous to every background. Doesn't matter what your religion is. So, at the end of the day, like, I've come to the realization that it's hard to live truly. I'm not hard. I'm not saying that it's not possible, because there are people living it. I guess, like, you could call them people of God, if that's one way of putting it. But I don't know if humans can, and this is a very generalized statement, but I don't know if humans can truly live by the book.
And I agree. Like, I don't, and that's the thing. Like, that's why, like, Christianity will be the first one to tell you, like, man, we are sinful.
Yeah.
Like, this morning, like, I was mad at my roommate. He hadn't done anything. I just woke up and I was like mad. I was like, man, and like, like Jesus says, like, if you're even angry at your brother, you already murdered them in your heart. And it's like, okay, and like, I know yesterday I sinned, and tomorrow I'll sin, right? And I think that's the reflection of, like, I cannot inherit eternal life. Like, doesn't matter how many good works I do. It doesn't matter, like, how much I do to, like, good. Like, doesn't matter. Like, I am a sinful person, right? And there's a need to, like, justice, right? And the way, like, I think, and I like to illustrate, and this is not my illustrations, from a guy named David Platt, but he says, like, if two friends, let's say, like, two friends are in the room and you slap one across the face, right? Like, oh, that would be damage, right? If I come here and, like, slap your face, like, it's gonna take a lot for us to build that relationship again.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of damage. If I go to, like, the presence of our university, do the same thing, dude, I am screwed. If I go to a police officer, I'll maybe put in jail. If I go to, like, a politician, to the president of the United States, right? Like, for every, like, hierarchy that I go, like, there's gonna be, like, the consequence is gonna be higher.
Right.
Now, like, let's say that we agree, like, there's a God who created the universe.
Sure.
Who created us. And I go to him and I slap him in the face. Like, will there any time ever be possible to, like, restore the relationship on my own doing? Could I ever bring enough gifts to him that will be like, did that do it? Like, and, like, now, not only that, but, like, what if I'm constantly doing that, like, every day,
Yeah.
And so, like, I know that I cannot live by the book. Like, I'm striving to the best I can, and I pray to God for strength and for a pure heart and a genuine heart. But I think that's where the beauty of it comes, because then it's like, Jesus never did it, right? From the accounts, like, and like, from the accounts of Christian tradition, from the accounts of Muslim traditions, from the accounts of, like, thinkers and people who historians, like, Jesus was a really, really good guy. Like, nobody, and so it was like, he was perfect. He was the one who lived by the book. And that's why I think it comes to us, like, okay, like, because you're perfect, like, I know I can trust you and come to you with my imperfections. But I don't think it is possible to live by the book, right? I think we should try, and we should aim to try it.
Sure.
But I think, and, like, I truly delight in doing it, but I know, like, man, I am, like, gonna sin again. And I think we usually tend to see things very black and white.
Right.
If it doesn't make sense, doesn't work. And, like, for example, like, do I believe in a God who's in charge of everything, everybody? Yes. Do I believe in free will? Yes. Those two, they don't work together.
Right.
In our minds, it's just black and white. It's like either or. But, like, I know God is in charge of everything, and I know I have free will, because God doesn't endorse sin.
Right.
I sin, and so, like, did God make me sin? No. did I sin on my own? Yes. Will God use that for good, for his purpose that he already knew 100%? And so it's like, within that, I think it's like, we need to have the conscious mind of like, okay, like, I'm going to strive to live my best life by the book, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to do everything I can to live by the book, knowing that I'm going to fall short every day.
Right. Yeah.
And that can be very frustrating for a few people. Like, man, like, why would I even try it then, right?
Yeah.
Or you can be like, man, this is just the reality. It's not
Right.
black and white, you know?
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah, because I guess on a very foundational level in this world, I guess you could say that nobody's ever truly good and nobody's ever truly bad. We're all living on that spectrum of good and bad. Like,
yeah,
I guess a good example would be, I don't know, what is a good example? Well, I guess let's put it this way. I guess in terms of numbers, there's always going to be a human being that does like 60% good and 40% bad. It's also going to be human beings that do 50-50. There's going to be human beings who do 95% bad and 5% good. So, there's all kinds of people that exist in this world. And, I think realizing that is also important. Because I think it's very easy to label like a group of people as they're bad people.
Yeah.
I personally think that's unfair.
Oh yeah, me too.
Because that's a very generalized way of putting it, right? Like, kind of like going back to that example of what you talked about, about yourself and like representing Brazil. How if you didn't represent yourself or you didn't represent well enough, they're going to think that all Brazilians are the way you are. But I think it's also important to realize, like you said, that's not how the world works. I am just Prateek. Not everybody in India is like Prateek.
Yeah.
Prateek could be a douchebag, but that doesn't mean that everybody else is a douchebag, right? I guess it's understanding those things also, right? It's easy to generalize in conversation because, you want to get a point across and so on. But I think when you're digging further, you have to realize that generalizations are not always true.
And even then, like, there's going to be Christian traditions, like different denominations that, like, will disagree on different things. And
right.
Some will, be like really set on this, and some will really be set on that. Like, even what I was saying, like free will and divine sovereignty. That's a big point of disagreement right there,
right.
Or people disagree on that. And so, like, how do we... Man, it's like, man, honestly, like, you can disagree on those things. I just want to love Jesus, It's like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so, and even that, like, for me, like, loving Jesus is going to be loving others, And so, and everything that I'm saying here, there are probably Christians who may listen and be like, nah, I disagree with everything that he said. And it's like, okay, cool. Like,
you have the right to.
And so
that's about it. Yeah.
But my hope is that they are kind of agreeing.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. Like, I understand what you mean, though, in that, like, everybody's gonna have a different perspective of viewing these things, and that's just the way the world is. Like, at the end of the day, not everybody's gonna believe what you believe in, or not everybody is gonna see the world the way you do. And I think that's good. Like, generally, I think that's good, because that, I guess it's like, as they say, like, spices of variety. I'm getting this phrase mixed up now. Is it spice is the variety of life, or variety is the spice of life? I don't know. Anyway, one way or the other, right? Like, that difference makes the world more unique. And like, I wouldn't want 10 other Prateeks to be living here at UCO. Like, that'd be weird as hell. Like, you want people to be themselves and have their own ideas. And sure, we're not going to agree with everybody, but that's okay, as long as nobody's being harmed, as long as, like, people are not getting into trouble and all of that. Like, I can accept that you're different. That's fine. I'm different. That's fine too. Like, because I think, especially, okay, I was gonna say, like, today, like, everybody's this way, but then this is probably a separate tangential topic, but like in terms of how people are polarized, right? Like, you see polarization in politics and religion and all of these topics. You can see how people are quite polarized. They're like, it is us or you're against us.
Yeah.
You're either with us or you're against us. Excuse
It's
me.
like either or mentality.
Exactly, like the either or mentality that exists in the world, right? Like, I was just gonna say, like, it's much more louder now, but it probably existed before too. But social media has helped sort of give it a platform to where everybody is full on blast, where you can see it happening. And because we're so connected to our devices, we also feel like it's much louder. But it probably was happening before too. It's just that there was nothing putting it on blast like social media is, or at the rate that it's putting it out on blast. Where was I going with that point? I guess what I was trying to get at was, even in those polarized sections, like, I feel it's very important for them to realize that life is actually lived much more in the center, like in the middle.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, everybody has their own ways of understanding that, and I'll leave that to them, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. It's like, I guess I've sort of lost my train of thought over here, but I guess in the sense of like realizing that I'm trying to make it make sense in my head, because sometimes it sounds good in my head, but then when I'm about to say it sounds like the dumbest thing I've ever said.
I definitely feel that.
Yeah.
I feel like at times I'm like, man, I had this great idea.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll let that pass. If it comes back, we'll get into it. But another idea that I wanted to sort of explore with the concept of like religion and things like that. There is this belief that people made religion, God didn't. God was just one benevolent God for everybody, but people were the ones who came in and sort of, for convenience sake or for any other reason, made religion. What's your take on that?
Honestly, like, as like a believer of Jesus, right? Like, I believe that there's like one God,
right?
And like created everything, and like if we want to open up and like read it, we can go through it, and I can pinpoint like, hey, here's like in my belief where things divided, right? I think there is like, I think for everybody there is a God.
Yeah,
everybody believes in something, even if they say they don't believe in God. Like, your God can be your smartphone or yourself. You know, I think it just comes down to like, okay, like, which one is the right God?
Sure.
And so, and I get it, like, that's going to be the part that's going to be divisive, because then everybody's going to go to different things, and it's going to come back to like, okay, which one, you think has the best case for it. And that's a whole nother tangent, but I think in a sense, like, religion, like, even talking specifically about like my religion, like Christianity, like, or I prefer to talk about like, hey, like, I'm a follower of Jesus, like, and I'll be self-proclaimed like a Christian. I don't want to deny Jesus whatsoever. Just even thinking like religion, it sounds like something that was like man-made. And there is an aspect of like, okay, like, man, like, I believe in the one true God, like, God of the Bible, I believe in Jesus, like, and then I follow his commandments, right? Like, commands us to community, and like the way we've been cultivating that commandment has been through like church. Like, he commands us to like read his word and learn and sing for joy, right? And I can make all those things really religious and be really like legalistic and legal about it.
Right.
Like, oh, I need to read my Bible every day at this time, and I need to read these much chapters, and I need to pray, or I can like just use those things to get to know Jesus more, right? And so I think in a very real sense, I think I agree with that. Like, like, people can make religion, and people can tell you like, oh, if you don't read your Bible and you don't pray and you don't this and you don't that and you do this and you need to sing and you need to do this and you're not going to heaven. And it's like, well, like, where in the Bible does it say that? And so I think in that sense, I agree. Like, people make religion and people can be really religious about it. Now, so like, I think like talking about like, oh, there is one God, and like Christianity call him like Lord or like Yahweh, as like the Jews would say, which now we translate it to like Lord.
Sure.
And we believe in the Trinity, which now they're like people, but like Jesus, and they call it Allah, and call
Krishna is one, but yeah,
and like, but it's all the same. I don't think that's the case, and so I personally will disagree on that one, but and that's like for me, like coming in from a person who was like,
that's okay.
And that's the part. It was like so interesting to me because like kind of like Shiva, I know he's been on the podcast.
Yeah,
like I came in and like I believed there was something because I was like, man, like there has to be something, right? Like call it the force or whatever. But I was like, I believe in something. And then it came down to like, okay, if I'm saying that I believe all, I agree with all, and like whatever, then I'm saying that all are the same, or like or all. Sorry, my tongue. If I'm saying like oh yeah, you can believe whatever, then it's like, well, you go and you pick up like a Quran and you pick up a Bible and you compare it, and it's like, no, like Quran is gonna say like Allah is God, Muhammad is his prophet, Allah has no sons. The Bible's gonna straight up say like Jesus the Son of God. And it's like, well, like those two already cannot be the same, and so. But I think at the end of the day, like God is gonna be anything that you bow down to it. And you put it as ruler over your life. And it's going to come down to like, okay, what are you making ruler over your life?
Right.
That can be your parents, that can be school, that can be Allah, that can be Jesus, and it's going to come down to like, why do you bow down to them? Like, why do you believe what you believe? And so I think that's kind of where I would put it.
Sure.
I don't know if that makes
that does
maybe
make sense.
Made a lot of sense.
No. I see what you mean in terms of like people making their smartphone their God and all of that kind of stuff too, right? Because your actions are I'm just wondering if someone's trying to come in here. Your actions are directed towards that thing, and your whole life revolves around that thing.
Yeah.
So then, in some sense, I guess that is your God, right? So yeah, like I see what you mean in that specific aspect. And about the differences in like the two books and so on, to like again, like I've not explored it enough to have like a strong argument.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, it's just some.
Yeah, the reason why I use those two is because they're the two that I'm most familiar with.
Or
I guess even I could use like the Jewish tradition and talk about like Christianity.
Sure.
But no, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So but no, okay, let me ask. I guess this could be like sort of our parting few questions over here towards the end. But are you? I mean, I guess you are. Like, it's probably a stupid question I'll ask, but I'll ask anyway.
There's no such a thing as stupid question. You go.
But no, I was gonna say, do you feel like we don't have enough conversations about these things, or do you think we have enough conversations about
we don't have enough? Like, man, like literally, like I think we treat it as such a taboo. And I know for a fact from like, man, if I could sit down with a Jew and just chat it up with them, oh man, that would like make my day. And I know like them talking about their God would make their day.
Right.
And like I've had experiences where like sat down with like a Muslim, like, okay, tell me why you believe what you believe. And they're like, tell me why you believe what you believe in.
Right.
It's just like, we all were made to worship. It's just gonna come down to like what you're gonna worship.
Yeah.
Again, and it's like we want to worship. Like our hearts love to like give ourselves to something. And so like why not talk about it, right? Like if it's like something that you love, like like, man, like this is the most like important thing of my life, like I love talking about his book, his collection of books, like somebody coming to me and be like, hey, do you want to talk about it? Like, that's going to bring me so much life and joy to my day. And, like, I know, like, people with other religions, it's kind of the same thing, or I would hope so, like, that would bring life. But I think it's been kind of like, oh, don't talk about it because it's polarizing.
Right.
And it's like, like, I want to learn. Like, like, what do you believe? Can we have these conversations, And, or, like, even, again, going back to, like, the whole, like, going and sharing.
Sure.
Like, I'm called to do that. And if I believe, like, why wouldn't I want to have those conversations? Like, man, tell me about it. But I think it's very unfortunate that it's, like, such a taboo. Like, politics, religion, and it's like, what is the third one? Don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. Is there a third one? But like,
I can't remember the third one either. But but I see what you mean.
There's such a thing as, like, don't talk about all these things. Like, well, why? These are things that actually matter. Like, let's be honest. Talking about, like, a football game as a football fan is gonna be forgotten in 2 months. But if we're talking about eternal life, we're talking about, like, life after death. If we're talking about how we are governing ourselves, like, why don't we talk about that more? Like, that's way more important than the score of the game. Like, and granted, there is a time to talk about the score of the game. It's so joyful. It's so fun.
Exactly.
It's like,
right.
Let's
There's
talk
a time
about
and place for it all.
But, like, these things are actually things that are, like, important. They're meaningful questions. Like, politics, for example. Like, man, it does matter. But, like, I think it's, like, how we talk about it. And that's the part that we haven't learned yet. Because then we start talking about politics and it becomes a debate. It becomes an argument. Start talking about religion, start becoming mine is right, yours is wrong. Yeah. And not like, oh, I'm gonna learn, or or ask good questions, right? Like, hey, why do you believe this way? Can I show you something? And being like, okay, yeah, show me. Like, tell me why you believe what you believe. Like, but we're not willing to just talk. We are willing, like, we want to win. Yeah, we want to win. Right. And that's the part that I think it's just like, man, no, like, that's not the point. Like, like, man, like, politics does matter. In the end of the day, like, it does matter who's ruling, like, over us and how things are gonna go, and those things are gonna affect our life. I think in the grand scheme of things, like, for me as a believer in Jesus, like, well, we have politics. Like, I'm not gonna spend my life devoted to being, like, angry at my brother and sister because they believe in a different politician or they have different agreements. But, like, it does matter right now. Like, I'm gonna pay taxes, and how are these being used? Like, it's my money being used to glorify God and provide for people who are in need, or are we fixing the roads and giving access to those who are in need of public transportation or things like that? Or how is, like, the school system? I care for the next generation. Like, I do want to be diligent with the resources that God has given me, and if I'm having to pay these taxes, I want to know how they're well spent. Let's talk about it. Like, why are we not talking about it?
Yeah. And look, I can understand that's not a conversation for everybody, and that's completely fine too. Like, if it's not for you, it's not for you. But I wonder, again, I don't want to, and I might have mentioned this before on a different episode, but I wonder, I'm happy to be wrong about this, but I wondered somewhere deep down inside if people don't like having these conversations because they, like, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, the fear of, not in this case, not conversion, but the fear of possibly feeling like they could be pulled in the sense that, like, their beliefs might not be strong enough, so they don't have a good ground to stand on when they're having those conversations. Because I've personally had a moment like that when I was here initially. I think this was 2017, 2018, possibly. Like, someone from the BCM, in fact, like, approached me, and for those of you who don't know, BCM is like a group on campus.
College ministry.
Yeah. They asked me about, like, Hinduism, and they sat down and they talked to me and everything. And when I went away from that conversation, I kind of felt like I did not have good answers, right? Like, about my religion. And like, it then, like, sort of made me think about how much do I know? How much do I care? all of that kind of stuff. And I wonder if that also sort of tends to affect it. And I might be wrong, but
and I think in part of it, like, is like these questions need to be asked.
Absolutely,
right?
I
Like,
agree.
why are we?
Because that strengthens your belief.
It strengthens your belief, and
yeah.
like, like, I mean, like, even like, to my context again, bringing it back, like the Bible commands us, like, be able to give like a good response to why you believe what you believe, right?
And I'm in a better place, much better place now compared to when I was 18.
And like, that's my personal conviction, and it's like I want to be able to defend what I believe,
right?
And so, but like, I'm willing to sit down and talk. And I think like 3 years ago, if you were to ask me, like, Pedro, go sit down with like, an imam of Islam or a Jewish rabbi or a Mormon missionary, like, I'd be terrified. I'd be like, no, like, what I'm gonna say, I'm not well acquainted with scriptures and stuff, but it's like it comes from that like deep wealth of like research and desire to learn and desire to grow, and being able to like in Christian tradition, there's this whole like apologetics sphere that's like being able to defend your faith, and that's a whole nother. That is a rabbit hole that like it's really fascinating, but it's a rabbit hole, and it's like okay, cool, but all of those things is good, but I definitely think there's like maybe a bit of fear, and maybe in America a little less than in some other parts of the world.
Got it.
Right, like in America, yes, for the most part, it's so and so called Christian. In other parts of the world, like maybe conversion may lead to death because like religion is so associated with like culture, and that's just the way of the flock moves, and like I know
the religion to law connection is quite tight.
It's way more, and and so like for somebody to come out of that and go to a different religion is going to be like you're putting like a target on your back, and I can see that being like a huge fear, but then I think in a real way, like even here in America, that fear is in there. Is like, oh, like like I don't want to have the target on my back. Like being Christian, like at times, like not as much in America, because like there are Christians that go to other parts of the world that like just by being there and saying I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, you may die. Like but like being Christian in America, there are going to be things that you're going to be expected. Like we're going to look at you as like this and that, and that's that. I can see it being like, oh, I don't, people being scared of labeling themselves as this or this and that, and I think like our call is, for me as followers of Jesus, is to represent Him well and not deny Him, but and even like that's kind of like again like so many like of my Muslim friends, like Pedro, like I'm terrified of talking Christians. Why? Well, because they just think we're all like, and granted, like that's not my belief, but like terrorists, or they think like this and that, and like
the 9/11 syndrome.
The 9/11 syndrome, and again, like history plays a huge role, and there's all those things that can't explain, but it's just like now, like like they are not like they're super friendly. They want to invite you to their home and make you food, and it's so fun, and their music is just awesome. It's just like and sitting down and like bridging that gap. I think that I know that it's what we're called to do, but definitely that's a good question. Like why are we scared? Why are you scared of going to those conversations? I think it's a really good self-reflective question that we all need to ask ourselves. Like, why don't I want to engage in those conversations? Why am I scared? What are the motives? Like, am I scared of not engaging in a conversation with like an imam or a rabbi because I feel like they're gonna make me look foolish? If so, is that my pride? And that can evolve on a whole lot of.
There could be a lot to unpack.
But no, it's a really good question to constantly ask yourself. Like, why am I scared? Going in and talking about these things.
Absolutely. But as we do talk about this, I do realize the fact that I guess we're sort of in a privileged position to be able to think about these things because other people are just burdened by life so much. Like just because of the circumstances that they're in and so on, to where they don't have the opportunity to like sit and reflect because that's like the time that's so valuable for them to be doing something else where, why does this matter? Like, I have to, my kid won't eat tonight if I don't do this. So I am also aware of that. And, I think understanding that is also important sometimes, or not sometimes, but in most cases, because everybody's going through their own rhythm of life. Like, as much as we can encourage it for people to think about these things, they will only think about it when they want to and when they can. So
and I think that's the realization. It's like, man, like I'm a foreign student in an American university. That says a lot, right? Like, we're like really privileged to be here. This is a gift. And like, I worked a lot. I have, a bunch of scholarships that I've ran to and tried to help pay my university, but I do have a lot of free time. Like, and with my free time, I do have the choice to just go and the freedom to just go and look at these things and that may not be the context for somebody who's like
in another part of the world.
In another part of the world, family of 5 kids, maybe the only one who's able to work and provide for all the family. And it's like, man, like, and then again, like, how can we care for those people? Right. And in a sense, I could go and tell those people about Jesus, and I truly believe that it would help. But like, how can I give generously? How can I support? And a lot of times, like, by those things, it's gonna, like, they're gonna see that you're following Jesus by the way you love, or and in those contexts, is like, man, there's a lot of people who don't have the time to think about those things. And if you do have the time to think about those things, like, it's a gift.
Oh, absolutely.
And it like it comes with a great responsibility, right? Because now I think the question is like, are you thinking about those things? So that's a really good point.
Absolutely. Any closing parting thoughts before we get done for the day? Anything you want to share?
I am just completely thankful for being invited for here. I've been able to see and follow a ton of the videos and see a ton of friends coming in, and so just really sweet getting to be a part of it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, of course. No, this is a pleasure. I hope this is...
No, it was so delightful, and I think those conversations, like, they help us think and they help us grow, and engaging those things help us grow in our faith, help us grow just even as a person, but like, and I hope, like, for everybody who's listening, that it was a blessing too, and that they get to experience those conversations and engage with those questions and reflect on those questions. So, but
cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pedro, for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. And for those of you listening and watching, thank you so much. We will see you guys next time. Adios.